Welcome back to a Kinema podcast. This is Christy Marchese. I'm the founder and CEO of Kinema. And today we're talking about Letterboxd and why we need to have Letterboxd exactly as it is now. And especially in a time when it is looking like it is going to change hands. So I spoke with Elizabeth Joyce. She is the person leading the charge with a Seed and Spark campaign to raise funds to cover legal fees to help buy Letterboxd and have it owned by the people that use Letterboxd instead of a bigger corporation. So let's jump into the interview. And we're back, and I'm so excited to be speaking with Elizabeth Joyce. Hi, Elizabeth. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you.
All right. I already gave a little bit of your bio, and I'm really excited to talk to you about Letterboxd and the campaign you're leading and how Letterboxd has the opportunity to be owned by a community of people. You've learned a lot about the power of Letterboxd for filmmakers. So I'm excited to jump in. But first, you don't have a traditional film background, which is often a good thing. You're now breaking into the film space. So how did you go from working in human rights to running a yoga company to now film?
So when I went to NYU as an undergrad, I thought I was going to major in human rights studies and filmmaking, and pretty quickly figured out that I wasn't a traditional fit in the filmmaking program, and also that I was really concerned with economic structures, that I was very preoccupied by economic structures. And I had an internship at Human Rights Watch that turned into a job, and I sort of had a path forward that made a lot of sense. So I pursued that as a professional path rather than filmmaking, but, was always writing and always participating in, whether it was like impact campaigns or whatever the opportunity was. The way that I went from working in NGOs and nonprofits and academia to then becoming a social entrepreneur, which is what the yoga company was about, was experiencing difficulties with funding models. And that's where I really learned about sort of all of the different constituencies that you have to bring together when you're running an organization, whether that is a huge corporation or a huge nonprofit or something small or an LLC for a film, that a lot of the business problems are the same, right? In terms of how do you get the funding that you need to do the thing that you want to do and accomplish the goals. And so wherever you are on that spectrum, you have to be able to answer those questions. And when I was working in nonprofits, we bumped up against the problem over and over of funders deciding after a period of time that, maybe their interests had changed. They were ready to move on to something else. One place that I worked, we had philanthropic funding that was supporting research around how to divert girls from child marriage into education. And funder changed their mind and decided to do something else. And the program really evaporated. Oh. And so that's a problem, right? That happens over and over again in organizations that are donor dependent, is that whether it is the interests of a donor or like the political environment that we find ourselves in right now, where grant funding is entirely different than it was 10 years ago, those are challenges that can upend an organization.
It's so funny. We were having a conversation on the future distribution at Sundance, maybe like 2023. And we're like, okay, what are our options? If we're donor-based, no, we can't rely on, the billionaires. We can't rely on the whims of those who have money because they can change their mind at any moment. You're like, okay, we'll do that. Like, do we go to the industry? Well, the industry is also billionaires. These big tech companies are run by kind of the same people who are doing the donations. So how do we find solutions? So I think in talking to you, and now have, like you, ended up back in film, but we're like, how do we build better business models? Like, how do we give ourselves a better chance of sustainability in the entertainment space by not being overly reliant on the platforms who have the audience or the donors who have the dollars but can change their minds? So is that why did you start Intrinsic? So what is Intrinsic Entertainment?
So as I sort of moved from NGOs to becoming a social entrepreneur and looking, what are the ways that you can bring impact investors to the table who are interested in giving startup capital that you need. But sort of as I went through that process, discovered that you still need to be able to offer a viable exit strategy if people are investing rather than donating. And so that work led me to thinking about, okay, so what does it look like to bring in values-aligned investors who are interested in, deploying patient capital and investing in things for a values-led reason and not just because it's the very most profitable.
And real quick, what do you mean by values aligned? So can you break that down for me? Values aligned, is there one set of values or it just could be any values as long as they're the same?
Any values. So when you think about a private equity company, the standard private equity company, right? They have a set of values. It's different than my set of values, but it is a set of values.
We like to be kind on this podcast, kind but honest.
Kind and honest. And, so if you look at that business model, right, what they do is they raise money from LPs, from their own investors. They get people to invest into their fund. And then they go out and they look for companies that they think can become profitable in a very short period of time, so that then they can return capital to their investors. They can return a profit to their investors on a really short window, right? So for the majority of sort of venture capital firms or private equity firms, that's 3 to 7 years. And they would really like it if it's closer to 3 than 7, but they'll stick it out for 7 if they have to. And so what that means, any private equity company is looking for a pretty quick turnaround on profits. And they're also using the slate model, which is that they're assuming that if they invest in 10 companies, that 5 of them are going to fail completely. 4 of them are going to either break even or be a little bit profitable. And 1 of them is going to hit it out of the park.
The unicorn.
The unicorn.
The unicorn.
Exactly. The unicorn. And the challenge with that is that if that is what you're optimizing for, then it is going with this assumption that once one starts to kind of like rise to the top, and that's the focus, and that's what everyone is sort of interested in, everyone is, instead of going around, if I'm a private equity firm, instead of looking for businesses that look like they are going to have a long-term sustainable, profit, but also positive impact on the community, I'm looking for, where can I make the most money in the shortest amount of time? I'm flipping businesses. Mm-hmm. And flipping, whether it's in the housing market or in, entrepreneurship, does not lead to good, sustainable, long-term outcomes. And so that's where I really started thinking about, within social entrepreneurship, what can you do to build a business model where you can bring in these values-aligned investors? And in this case, when you're thinking about positive social impact or being able to make decisions that aren't necessarily the most profitable. So when I had the yoga mat company, for example, I was manufacturing yoga mats in a unionized factory in Connecticut, and we were using sustainable natural rubber. And I wanted to find values-aligned investors. And I would go out and I would have meetings, and they would say, well, instead of the unionized factory, we could use prison labor, or we could manufacture overseas in a place that has very lax labor laws. They would come up with ways that we could be more profitable, but in ways that I thought were exploitative. And so that was an example of not being values aligned. And so in this case, in terms of the film industry, where now that we have companies that are publicly traded, venture backed, right? We've got a sort of an assortment of ways that they're funded. But anytime your first and foremost priority is maximizing your return to shareholders, you end up in a situation, inevitably, regardless of whether as a human being this is what you might choose, your job actually ends up demanding that you're optimizing for this fast return to investors, that you're going to squeeze profits as quickly as possible. And that leads to underpaying people, or, utilizing methods that maybe have a negative social impact, all kinds of things, layoffs, right? So when I started in 2020 was when I shut down the business that I had previously, because, I was 8.5 months pregnant. It was March 2020, and I was ready to move on. I was ready to go back to, at that point in time, I felt like I had always had this love for filmmaking, love for the industry. And as I started, I was ready for a career transition. The pandemic happened, all of these changes. And as I started looking more seriously at getting into the film industry, realized that the way more valuable contribution I could make was actually around saying, hey, there are actually alternative business models that would benefit the people that are making the films that I love.
So that's what Intrinsic does. So you advise filmmakers on how to set up, how to set up their LLC, or where does the Intrinsic meet the filmmaker before we dig into Letterboxd?
So we didn't found it directly to be an advisory service. Really what we're planning to do, the reason that we founded it is because when we looked at the problems, I'm a screenwriter is where I come to filmmaking. And as I was, initially taking meetings around my first few scripts and hearing the advice over and over again that if you want to break in, you should write a low budget horror film. And I would say, ooh, well, that's kind of not what I write, right? Like, that's not what I write at all. And the first time I heard that advice, I thought, oh, that's strange. And then the 10th time I heard that advice, I thought, okay, this is a unit economics program. The problem. This is a unit economics problem where the reason that those are sort of considered saleable in the industry is because they're cheap to make. They know how to market them, and they know who is going to go buy tickets to go see them. And so that as I recognized that the real problem with the kind of films that I both write and also watch are, it's not that there's no demand for them. It's that that demand has been fragmented, right? In terms of, in the same way that kinema provides filmmakers with an opportunity to determine their own fate, right? To manage their distribution, to go out and to connect directly with the audience that cares about their films, rather than sort of being at the mercy of distributors that may or may not actually have a great plan for connecting to their exact audience. The reason that we founded Intrinsic was because we built a collaborative marketing platform that enables filmmakers to connect directly to small local businesses, local entrepreneurs, to start building and sharing communities local to where they are as early as script development, and to build that audience. So my original pitch deck, when I put this together for Intrinsic and for our flagship platform, it has a ladder on it where at the top of the ladder is Letterboxd, which is where films that have been made that exist can be discovered and find their audience. And I was pitching that our platform was the first rung on that ladder, where when you're sort of in development, you can start building a community of people who care about similar themes, who care about the local community where it's being made, right? Sort of on a more, not as much of necessarily a filmmaking level, but communities who care and share different issues. And that the next rungs of the ladder were, on my original pitch deck, were, crowdfunding. So then you go to Seed and Spark, and then you go to social media, and then you go to festivals, and then you go to kinema, and then you go to Letterboxd. And that was sort of what I was envisioning here, was this idea that for filmmakers to be able, we have the technology now that people can self-distribute, and that by connecting the different organizations on different rungs of that ladder, we could move all the way through.
Community is the key word here. I feel like our filmmaking community has known it for a while because we've done it out of necessity, in a sense, how to build community, how to connect with audiences. If you're indie, you know how to do community. Now the bigger companies are catching up to it. Seems like every media publication is figuring out, how do I become a community? How do I have people talk to each other about my brand? And it doesn't always work that way. It's not that easy. I think Emily Best and Ivan Asquith have the community playbook coming out soon, which I'm very excited for. We've talked about this a little bit, the community. And so from what I've understood from you, like that, the value of having community is almost like way more than whatever marketing dollars you might spend. So can you talk a little bit about what you've seen with Letterboxd and the value that community brings to films?
Yes. There's one other thing that is important to say about Intrinsic and Community Center and the platform. So what makes Community Center different than any of the other social media platforms that exist?
Wait, what's Community Center?
Oh, Community Center is our flagship. So that's why Intrinsic. So I was finishing the answer because there was an answer for what Intrinsic is and what we're doing that is important for your audience, and then also for how it connects to the Letterboxd, is that all of the social media platforms that filmmakers use at this point to try to build community around their films, around their work, are owned by these massive tech companies. And so each time one of those companies changes the algorithm or changes their advertising program or makes decisions that are in their own financial best interest, it actually harms the filmmakers, right, who are building communities on those platforms. And so the real reason, right, the reason that we said, yes, we do need another platform, because a lot of people say, like, well, do we need another platform? What do we need another platform for? And the value that we're bringing at Intrinsic is we're bringing a business model that we use, but we want everyone else to be able to use also, which is a way of maintaining ownership of that platform within the community so that you don't have to go and utilize, these tech company platforms that will, you can pay for advertising on Meta and they can serve up your sponsored post. But what you don't know is what percentage of the engagement is coming from bots, or what percentage of that engagement is actually providing meaningful conversion down the road. So the reason Intrinsic was founded, and yes, this is our platform and we think it's super important, but even more than the function of the platform is the business model underlying it. The business model is what allows it to serve the community.
And sorry, because I want to make sure I'm understanding it.
Yeah.
So Intrinsic is a platform, or it will be a platform, or Community Center is a platform that is run by the business of Intrinsic.
So Intrinsic is the business, and Intrinsic has developed this business model. And our first initiative is this platform called Community Center. And also our business model, we are giving to people. Anyone who wants to use it, will help people use it.
And the business model is that the public benefit corporation, like setting up a public benefit corporation and finding values aligned investors?
It is a public benefit corporation as a legal entity. And then it goes beyond that in terms of our exact structure of stock.
The stock structure. Okay. Yes, let's go. This is big. Can you tell I'm struggling here? I'm like, oh my God, I'm not an economics person. So
no, it's fine.
Let's go stocks.
Let's go stocks. So in our business model, we have Class A stock and Class B stock. Class A stock is what traditional investors, right, are coming in. They're providing startup capital. They want a seat on the board, that sort of a thing. So they're writing these bigger checks and they're getting Class A stock ownership.
Now, so I've got that for my investors. So like my lead investor of my seed round put in the biggest check in that round and has a seat on the board. I have 3 people on my board. So he's a Class A investor.
And so then we also have a Class B of stock, and Class B stock is for employees. It's for people who are buying equity through WeFunder equity crowdfunding campaigns. And it's people who are joining it at much smaller dollar amounts. And what that allows us to do is to buy back the shares from the Class A stockholders. So as we were saying before, anytime you have a business, if you're going to raise money for that business, your investors want to know, what is the exit strategy? How are they going to realize the profit on their investment?
And what are those typical structures? It's that you go public, you sell to a larger company, or you pay back in dividends. Is that correct?
You can do private equity. You can do another round of funding, right? There are sort of limited options, right? Because at the end of the day, if that's the structure, what it comes down to in terms of value alignment is when people first give you their money, that's when you have to make sure that your values aligned, right? And so that's the benefit of being a public benefit corporation, is that it's written in your bylaws from day one that you have the legal ability to prioritize social mission over just returning profit to shareholders. And so it gives you the legal backbone, essentially, to be able to say, we're going to make choices sometimes that might impact profitability, right? And that we're making them because they're aligned with our social mission. It doesn't mean that you're not seeking profitability. It just means you have that option. And so within that, our particular framework allows for companies to buy back the shares instead of the investors waiting for an IPO, waiting for an acquisition. It allows us to gradually buy back their shares and increase the ownership of Class B until it's actually majority Class B owned.
And if I'm a Class A investor though, and I really love the company, we still haven't gotten to Letterboxd yet, but let's say it's some made up company. I put my money in because I'm excited about the company, and the company's growing. Like, why would I want to sell my shares? Because I actually think that the company might have a bigger exit or might be able to be profitable. So I want to hold on to my shares. How do you incentivize me to sell them to Class B investors?
Yeah, so Class A investors are welcome to hold on to their shares if they are okay with receiving dividends as their exit. So that's fine. As their profit, I shouldn't say exit, as their profitability, right?
Yeah, so it is no sale. They know that this company, because it's a public benefit corporation, it is not going to sell to private equity or to any company. So it can't sell to private equity or can't sell to any company.
So we're not going to sell to any company. We're not going to be acquired by any company. We will do these continual buyouts with people who want to join through equity crowdfunding, through these measures. But, we also have the option. It's not like a publicly traded company. And a publicly traded company, when when you have an offering on the stock market, anyone can buy those shares that you're offering, right? You don't have control over who's offering and who's not. The benefit to working with WeFunder, which is also a public benefit corporation, the benefit to working with WeFunder is that we do have the ability. So if someone shows up that isn't values aligned and says, we want to buy all the shares that are available, we have the ability to say, no, thank you. We're actually sticking with this, so you can actually set your range, your investment range. So we anticipate our investment range being a minimum of $100 and a maximum of $2,500. So that makes it so that no one buyer is now buying up the entire round.
Got it. And so now we will get into Letterboxd, because this is the model in which, so you developed this model with Intrinsic. You've been testing it out. You know that it works. And so now you see, as you're going along running the business, you see that Letterboxd might be up for sale again. This is, I don't even know, 6 months ago. Tiny, which is the current company that owns it, I think they bought a 60% stake in it at what, 60 million originally?
That's the part I can't go into as far as because none of it's publicly available, disclosed.
Got it. So now let's move into the Letterboxd version of this. So you've been building Intrinsic, you set this economic model up, you know that it works. And so now you see that maybe this is something that could be applied to Letterboxd. Like Letterboxd, the power comes from the users, and nobody wants, especially the users, don't want it to. And what's great about the founders is somehow during the sale where they sold a stake to the Canadian company Tiny, they were able to keep the company as it was. It kept the community. They didn't change the product too much. But now Tiny is looking to sell their 60% stake in it. And all the big companies from Sony and Versant to the Angler looking at it, kind of coming in and buying it. And the fear in the community is if a big tech company comes in or a big media company comes in, they're gonna destroy it. They're gonna push their own product, or they're gonna change it. They're gonna shove ads in it. You do a great job, Elizabeth, of explaining enshittification to people of what happens when a big company comes in, makes it terrible. And so the idea is that it could be community owned. Walk me through that. So what does that look like? And you are running a Seed and Spark campaign to fundraise first for the legal fees, to then set up this structure. And then walk me through how that would work, of what would the number, and I know you can't comment on the numbers, but from what I've seen, it's anywhere from $60 million to $250 million. So it would cost to buy this portion of Tiny, and you still have to have the original founder's approval. If I put my money into Seed and Spark right now, how do you end up, or your entity end up coming in with a public benefit corporation and acquiring with Class A investors, and then so that I can come in with my Class B and become an owner? How does it work?
But so to go into more detail, on April 26th, that's when the Semaphore story came out. And the week before, we had finished a year's worth of work with Harvard Law School on our entity structure, on our class structure, on all of these issues, to make sure that we had all of these legal pieces exactly the way that they needed to be in order to build our platform community center, and to, keep putting this model out for filmmakers and film businesses to be able to use. On April 26th, the Semaphore story broke, and we immediately thought, okay, this is fascinating, because the whole time we have been building what we believe is the first rung on the ladder, and Letterboxd is the top rung on the ladder. So if that top rung on the ladder fundamentally changes because it's acquired by a private equity group or a strategic group, that actually, it's not just about us, it's about everyone on the ladder. It's about the impact that will have on everyone in an industry that is already really hurting, right? And so we immediately jumped into gear here and said, okay, our business model can scale up to do this acquisition, but it's not now we need to do a different round of legal work in terms of investor docs and disclosures and audits and all of the things that come along with trying to do an acquisition. And so the fastest way for us to jump into this race was to do a crowdfunding campaign where we're not selling securities, we're not selling equity, because it's so much more complicated, the process of selling equity and securities. So the fastest way for us to do that was to launch the Seed and Spark campaign, to make sure that we could afford to bring on lawyers, tax specialists, accountants, international global transaction people, right? All of the people that we didn't already have on our team at Intrinsic, because we have been building this other model. It's to cover the costs of that. And I'm very excited to say that as of just before we started talking to each other, we're really close. We're a few $1,000s away from being greenlit on Seed and Spark. So we feel confident now that, thank you. So we expect that in the next week, we're going to be greenlit on Seed and Spark, and we can jump into this next phase of the campaign. And what that looks like is bringing in now officially all of the people that we've spoken to that are part of this coalition that are going to write the bigger checks. We're also going to run a future, what's called a Reg CF equity crowdfunding campaign on WeFunder, which means that's where I was talking about the idea of these low minimum buy-ins so that people can participate who aren't professional investors and aren't extraordinarily wealthy, and that we can bring them in to collaborate with us. And each year we will be able to run an additional round and bring in more people at those lower dollar amounts and buy back those shares.
Got it. And so why do this? Why is Letterboxd so important?
So Letterboxd is so important to the independent film industry because, one, they have over 15 years, they have aggregated 30 million global cinephiles, right, in one place that love film, that celebrate film, that promote film, that create these organic word of mouth marketing campaigns just because they love cinema. And they have spent 15 years doing that. And so there isn't an easy replacement for it. You know, some people say, well, why not just build another one? And you could do it, right? But the founders have put 15 years in with this specific focus. And what Letterboxd really does at this point, if you look at films, so if you look at now production budgets versus the required marketing spend for different films, the average commercially successful independent film is spending 240% of their production budget to be commercial success. That's an insane number, right? When we think about fundraising, it's also the hardest thing to fundraise for, to say, you know, well, we need P&A money. That's the hardest part to fundraise for. What's really interesting is that if you look at independent films that have high engagement on Letterboxd, they achieve commercial success at substantially lower marketing spends. A really interesting example of sort of, you know, two different examples here. If you think about Anora, which Sean Baker made for around $6 million, and then Neon spent $18 million marketing that film. Those are not numbers that the average independent filmmaker can compete with. If they have not been acquired by a wealthy distributor, no one can compete with that. If you look at the film Hundreds of Beavers, that was made for $150,000, and they spent $2,500 marketing on Letterboxd and paid ads on Letterboxd. John Race did a really great case study with them, actually, that everyone should watch. But that the idea that from this marketing perspective, we have, you know, as we talked about before, on social media, you can do paid advertising, but it's not very specific. It's not highly targeted. And we don't have good data about what is actually causing conversions. Whereas on Letterboxd, we have an audience of cinephiles who are highly motivated and are then going on their own and creating additional word of mouth campaigns. It's also, if I were anyone launching my film on Kinema soon or in the future, what I would be doing would be going on Letterboxd, finding comparable films, right? Writing reviews, reading other people's reviews of those films, creating lists, right? You can create a list of films that are in sort of the vibe of your film. You can start building a following on Letterboxd. And you can also just use it as a public data source. You can go and you can read reviews of films that you think people who are interested in this film will be interested in yours. You can read what resonated with them about that film. You can read all kinds of, you can follow people. And so it's actually a really interesting, useful tool for people that exists out there that we can use right now.
I think like the numbers are always surprising to me of like what a big difference it makes if you don't have a big marketing budget. Just being able to use Letterboxd well can make a huge difference. Sorry, we're like so out of time. I know we could go in 100 different directions, but before we go, how can I'm not sure when this will come out. So when does the Seed and Spark campaign end?
The Seed and Spark campaign ends on July 26th, and then we will be doing a Reg CF round on WeFunder coming up. And then there will be opportunities for people to continue to participate. So if you don't make it in time to kick into the Seed and Spark on this round, you can still sign up to follow us there and you'll still get our updates.
Okay, guys. So the best way to get is to go to the Seed and Spark page for this and sign up for updates.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm Elizabeth Joyce of Intrinsic and leading the campaign for Letterboxd to be owned by the people. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Christy.
And that's our episode. Thank you to our special guest,
our producer and editor, Ron Pissarro, and you, the filmmakers, creators, marketers, and distributors that are dedicated to connecting audiences with great films.